seen a number of questions online about TDIU and as it relates to taking care of dependents. So does having to support a number of dependents make it easier to prove that your work is maybe marginal or not substantially gainful? And does household income affect the veteran's TDIU eligibility? In other words, if you can't work, but someone else in your house is working, are you still eligible for TDIU? And then some dependent and survivor benefits require a permanent and total rating. TDIU is a total disability rating, but does it count as permanent and total? So those are three important questions, and we're going to address all of those today.
So does having to support dependents make it easier to prove that you cannot work sufficiently? No. Eligibility for TDIU depends solely on the veteran's service-connected disabilities and how much they impair the veteran's ability to sustain gainful employment. So this question might stem from confusion about the federal poverty threshold. Like we discussed earlier in the podcast, the Census Bureau publishes different thresholds depending on family size and age, but VA only uses the threshold for a single person.
Next question, does household income affect the veteran's TDIU eligibility? In other words, if you can't work, but someone else in the house, a spouse, a parent, can, are you still eligible for TDIU? And the answer is yes, you still are. Like you just said, TDIU is a question about you, the veteran, not what your spouse is doing, your parents doing. It's about you and whether you can work. This confusion, this question and the confusion around it might be due to VA's disability pension, which is a needs-based program in which VA looks at the veteran's countable annual income, which also includes the income from a spouse or dependent children. That's explicit in regulation and statute. So, but that's a different program. The VA pension program, disability pension, is different from compensation, and TDIU is part of service-connected compensation. So, household income does not affect TDIU. So just because a spouse could support you doesn't mean that you aren't entitled to compensation for your inability to earn substantially gainful employment.
Is TDIU permanent and total? So TDIU is a total disability rating. So these veterans receive the same compensation as Scheduler 100, as a Scheduler 100% veteran, or a veteran who's receiving a 100% rating, either because of the combination, or they have a 100% rating itself, as well as the healthcare benefits like Priority 1 access with fewer copays. But many of the dependent benefits like DIC, Chapter 35 DEA, CHAMP VA require a permanent and total rating. So when is TDIU considered permanent and total, or P&T, as it's commonly referred to? TDIU is not automatically permanent and total. It is total. But that permanent is really the sticking point. VA must expressly determine that the veteran's disabilities are permanent. In other words, without likelihood of improvement. A disability is considered permanent when the service-connected conditions causing unemployability are static, incurable, and unlikely to improve throughout the veteran's life. And the authority for that can be found in 38 CFR 3.340B. VA evaluates performance based on medical evidence, treatment history, age, and prognosis. No single factor is controlling.
So how do you know if VA determined that your TDIU or your ratings are permanent and total? You should look at the decision letter. You might see something like no future exams scheduled, language such as eligibility to dependents education assistance is established, no future exams necessary. Those two things can indicate a permanent and total finding. You were granted Chapter 35 DEA or CHAMP VA benefits. The code sheet, which veterans don't often get, but your agent or attorney should have access to through VBMS, pull it. It should say permanent and total on that code sheet, or disabilities are flagged as static. And so we often look, in our practice, Christine will pull for that and take a look at that to see, if the VA has awarded permanence in that rating.
One thing that I think it's important for us to cover is that permanent and total If someone has a permanent and total rating and they have TDIU, and that's the basis for them having that total rating, that 100%, but they go back to work and their income then, they're earning substantially gainful income, that can be taken away. That TDIU can be taken away, right? The TDIU is requirement is that someone is not able to maintain and sustain substantially gainful employment. So I think that's a key piece, is that if the income goes up, just because we're using the word permanent.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's something we try to emphasize every time we talk about P&T ratings. We had a lot of questions about them. It's really important to a lot of veterans out there to get that P&T rating because of all the ancillary benefits that we talked about today. Permanent is not forever. It is not like locked in forever permanent. So just know that if circumstances change, your ratings and benefits can change.
Exactly. So when does VA decide TDIU is not permanent and total? If the conditions are expected to improve, if VA believes that employability may change, if disabilities are not commonly static, so like post-surgical recovery, recent treatment changes, unstable conditions, then VA may determine that it's not permanent and total. And then another question that we get a lot is how veterans can seek permanent and total determination. If a veteran believes their disability's prognosis is static and unlikely to improve, a written request for P&T determination may be submitted. Supporting medical evidence, like most of these claims, is essential.
Yeah.
Especially opinions about prognosis, chronicity, and the improbability of improvement.
That's right. And just to back up to something that you mentioned about, VA deciding your TDIU is not permanent, I think it's important to know for people out there that you can actually apply for TDIU if you think you're going to have a temporary situation where you can't work. Let's say you're undergoing treatment for cancer, and you're undergoing, intensive chemotherapy or radiation treatment. You're unable to work for a year or two, but you have every hope that you'll recover and go back to the workforce. You can apply for and get temporary TDIU. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long-term thing, but if you can't secure and follow substantially gainful employment for a couple years, that's a scenario in which this unpermanent status is completely appropriate. So to summarize all the answers to the questions here, dependents have no bearing on TDIU. They don't make it easier or harder to get a grant for TDIU benefits. But dependents may qualify for some benefits if TDIU becomes permanent and total. TDIU is not P&T by default, but it can be if you ask for it or VA decides to grant it. And veterans should always really closely review your award letter to confirm whether VA has made that P&T determination. I know they're long, a lot of boilerplate in there, but look for those keywords we talked about and to determine if you got that P&T rating.